Another player that is requesting a trade, but in a bit of a different situation, is James Harden.
There we go.
Now, James Harden, unsuccessful Nets tenure. You can attribute it to injury. Sixers tenure, to be determined. We'll see if he gets traded. But if he does get traded,
the Sixers tenure?
If it's a failure.
Oh, I was just gonna say injuries.
Oh no,
okay.
Nothing. James Harden needs to humble himself. He does. This is his third trade request in the last 4 years. And this most recent one, asking out of Philadelphia, is puzzling. I'm trying to gauge why he's asking out of Philadelphia. The reason is because last offseason he took a $15 million pay cut in hopes that this offseason he'd capitalize on that gesture and favor he did for the Sixers, and they'd repay him by giving him a big payday. But Daryl Morey is hesitant to give him that money. And the truth is that James Harden brought this on himself. The Sixers wouldn't be hesitant to pay him if, with the chance to close out Boston up 3-2, he did an average 11 points, 5 turnovers, shot 26% from the field, and went 1 for 11 from 3 in the last 2 games. Last year, the Sixers were tied with Miami 2-2. James Harden's coming off a 30-point game where he backpacked. And the next 2 games, he scores 14 in Game 6 and 11 in Game 7. Looking at this reoccurring pattern, isn't it telling that the GM that knows Harden the best doesn't want to give him a big-time deal? The team that knows Harden the best, the Houston Rockets, openly came out and said, we're not pursuing James Harden. Instead, they gave big-time money to Fred VanVleet instead of a hometown legend in James Harden. The Rockets don't even want him. And that's where he lost all his leverage in negotiations with the Sixers. And that's why the Sixers, they're not competing against anybody to sign James Harden at the price point that he wants. I think it's time for James Harden to look himself in the mirror and ask himself if he's actually the problem. Because 3 trade requests in 4 years, no matter how you slice it, is a bad look. I'm James Harden's biggest fan. I will defend him. He just had a tremendous season. He did bounce back in the regular season. In the playoffs, he had great games, but it wasn't matched with consistency. The Sixers have the reigning MVP in Joel Embiid. They fired Doc Rivers, in part because I think Doc was going to get fired anyway, but because James Harden didn't like Doc Rivers anyway. Mm-hmm. They brought a new head coach in Nick Nurse, who universally from a lot of people, they think it's a major upgrade. Nick Nurse is finally going to bring some adjustments to Philadelphia and have them playing a different style of basketball. That should excite James Harden. And for him to opt into his player option and request a trade shortly after because he's upset that the Sixers don't want to pay him big-time money, I think is foolish because no team wants to pay him big-time money. And any team he goes to doesn't want to pay him big-time money. So wanting out just because of that, I think is very selfish. And not to mention all of last year, there was hints at him reuniting with the Rockets, and that probably made teammates feel like he wasn't all the way bought in. Mm-hmm. So Harden has to look at himself and commit to one team and say, let's get the job done. He should feel like he owes the city of Philadelphia better performances in the playoffs. And the fact that he feels like he hasn't let nobody down is alarming.
Man, you guys want to hear James Harden's playoff numbers last 2 years? Let's do it.
Goes.
Sure. So James Harden averaged 20 points a game, just in totality.
Last 2 years?
Yeah, this season in totality. 11 games, 20 points per game, 8 assists, 6 rebounds, 87% from the free throw line. On 2-point percentages, he shot 40%, threes, 37%, overall 39% from the field. Last year, 12 games, 40% from the field, 36% from the 3-point line, 43% from the 2-point line, 89% from the free throw line, and then he averaged 19 and 9. You're right. He does need to look himself in the mirror and realize that he is definitely one of the problems. He also hasn't been playing very well in these last 2 seasons. I mean, Philly has pretty much underachieved this year, especially. I feel like they've underachieved. They had an opportunity to take out Boston in the second round, head to Joel Embiid's first ECF in his NBA career, and they was up 3-2, and Jason Tatum went crazy in the fourth quarter, and then Jason Tatum had the 50 ball, and Embiid was a part of that problem, but James Harden was also a part of that problem. So you have to look in the mirror. I think Philly not extending Harden's a good move for Philly. I do believe you should not go in long-term into James Harden because he's not the same player you are. But I also think Philly should just blow it all up. I think Embiid's time in Philly is done. I do truly believe that. I think by next summer, Joel Embiid will be on another team. I also think James Harden's a guy who doesn't really – he's just not a person that's going to move the needle for Philly anymore. He's not that same player he was. And that's why he wants to go to the Clippers, because that move to the Clippers would pretty much put them at the top of the West with the Lakers, at the top of the West with Denver, with the Suns. They will put them in serious contention if he goes to the Clippers, because you got him, you got PG, you got Kawhi if they are healthy. And I think that's why I think that's why he realizes himself. That's why he has the Clippers up there, because he thinks this is one of his many chances to go out there and honestly get a ring, because in Philly he's not going to do it. But I think, Joel, you made some good points. You know, he has to look in the mirror. If your former franchise doesn't want you, if your GM, Maury, has known him pretty much his whole career, doesn't want you, it kind of comes to the fact that you're just not that same player you was. You did have a bounce back in the regular season, but in the playoffs, you had your stinkers, you had your great moments, but overall, you just wasn't that good. And that's been James Harden for the past couple of years.
Is there a way that James Harden can change his reputation with you guys? At this point in time, the way I see it,
there's one way.
There's a way.
There's one singular way. But the way that it's starting to transpire is that James Harden is seemingly going to either be the second or the third option on the team. If he stays with Philadelphia, he's a number 2 option. If he goes to the Clippers, barring injury, we're looking at him as the number 3 option. He will be facilitating the offense. That would be his role. But really, why were we praising James Harden as much as we were when he was on the Rockets? Because he was by far and away their best player, one of the best players in the league, one of the best scorers that this league's ever seen, but wasn't able to get the job done in terms of winning an NBA championship. Came a game short from going to the NBA Finals in 2018. Yes, I understand that was the best team ever assembled in terms of Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green. For sure, we can give him an excuse for it. However, he was extremely poor in that Game 7. But again, the only way you change your perception on James Harden is if he is amazing on his way to winning an NBA Finals. But even still, if you're not the number 1 option, it's not that same praise. You still get acknowledgement for sure, but not the same way that people were trying to prop James Harden as potentially being the 3rd best shooting guard of all time. I feel like at this point in time, those conversations are completely axed. It'll be almost near impossible for James Harden to enter that top 3 over Dwayne Wade, unless he does have an extremely impressive finals run. He needs the NBA championship. But at this point in time, I'm starting to question if that's ever going to happen. And I think that his best opportunity, yes, would be with the Clippers to win that NBA championship, barring injury. If they're healthy, the Clippers are extremely scary. But I'd look at it like, if I'm Philadelphia, am I going to give up 2 years in? Is this what I'm going to do? Am I going to give up on the process? Because if I'm giving up on James Harden, Joel Embiid's going to be next in line to get traded. So I look at it like this. James Harden, yes, the team may not want to commit to James Harden long term, but what's your other option? Start the process all over again? Yes. Trade Joel Embiid, that's it, it's done?
What do you get for Harden?
So then that's it.
Players?
That's exactly my question too. If we're trading James Harden,
you can get a lot for Embiid.
What's the best? Embiid's going to give you a bag. But what's the best that I can get for James Harden? Unless the Blazers are willing to make a trade with me and another team gets involved and I could potentially get Damian Lillard. That'd be amazing. But is that likely? I'm just trying to go through every single scenario here. I get it. I'm with you guys. James Harden at this point in time has been very underwhelming, especially his time with the Philadelphia 76ers. But if I'm the 76ers, I have to see this through. Because the process is very quickly becoming a failure.
But he's not the only one that's been underwhelming.
Agreed.
It's been your MVP that's also been underwhelming.
Exactly.
And you have
right.
to realize
we can't just blame this on Harden.
This team, every single year, whether it be injuries, underachievement, somebody not dunking on somebody when he needs to, coaching. There is always something that stops this team from going to the Eastern Conference
the
Finals.
Bounce.
And at some point, you have to look at it and be like, no, this shit is over. This process is a failed process. It's not going to get to where it needs to get. It's reached its peak. And that's okay. Sometimes you can cope with that. Sometimes you can understand it. And that's the same thing the Raptors are having a problem with now. Understanding that this team is not going to reach this peak that it needs to, and you have to blow it up. And with the Philadelphia Sixers, you have to understand that. Yes, James Harden can still be a good player somewhere else. Embiid can bring you a lot in a trade package. But this team, as constructed, if you do decide to bring Harden back, it's not going to do anything but underachieve, and it's always going to be something.
But they were one game away from the ECF. 1 game.
And what happened?
I get it. They blew.
They were one game away against Atlanta,
and they had
seed.
an unbelievable. Oh, I'm with you. Listen, bro. This is on Harden. This is on Embiid. This is on Doc. It's mostly on the players.
A silver platter for them to win.
Jason Tatum was cheeks.
Here's the thing.
Quarters 1 through 3. Quarter 4, he got hot.
I don't think that the Sixers are quitting on James Harden. I think James Harden is quitting on the Sixers.
He
requested a trade.
Little both.
That's not the Sixers giving up.
Little both.
And honestly, I think once Ben Simmons, once that kind of sailed, that felt like the end of the process. I don't think this is the end of the process.
Joel Embiid just won MVP. I feel like Joel Embiid is the process.
Round, yeah.
Agreed.
Ben Simmons was a big part of that too,
For
though.
Sure. Absolutely right.
And you make a good point, Drew, because the fact that Harden has not won a championship in his prime is probably going to stop him from getting that conversation of top 3 shooting guard ever. But he still has a chance to, rectify in a sense kind of how he's viewed, because he could go, whether that's the Clippers or another team, he just has to be a facilitator. And we know he could be one of the best facilitators in the league, right? We know.
Led the league in assists,
exactly. Just led the league in assists. We were having arguments. He's an all-NBA player, and he was only averaging 20, 21 points a game. So if he's able to change it, and his usage rate has gone down dramatically from his last year in Houston to Brooklyn to Philadelphia. I mean, he was down to 25%, 27% this past year, and that was his lowest since OKC, where he was around 25%. So that kind of shift in role has already started since you have Embiid there, and he hasn't been, as ball dominant as he was in Houston, of course, over 40% some years. But what James Harden has to do is, like you guys have said, look at yourself in the mirror, because when he has these stinkers like he did against Boston, where we give him the 240 balls 100%, he won them, especially game 1 without Embiid, won them that game, no doubt about it. But then when you follow that up going 2 for 14 in game 2, 3 for 14 in game 3, he took 8 shots in game 5, and in elimination games, game 6 and 7, he was 7 for 27, but 16 assists to 10 turnovers. I think that's his biggest issue, is that when James Harden gets in these ruts and his shot isn't falling, it affects the other aspects of his game. We know defensively he's never been that guy. We're not expecting him to. But when your shot isn't falling and now you're turning the ball over and you're not getting your teammates involved, that's just going to make things worse from you. So if James Harden is able to, when his shot isn't falling, be able to lift up in other places, then we could have a different scenario, because we give passes at times for a guy like Jason Tatum who struggles at times or inconsistency, but the defense is always there. The playmaking's there. The rebounding is there. And we're like, you know what? Shot wasn't falling, but everything else was stepping up. For James Harden, though, that's not the case. If the shot's not falling, his entire game comes down. And if James Harden isn't playing up to his caliber, at least regular season-wise, this is the Sixers team going to be. They're going to be a second-round exit. They're going to be a failure for a team that is expecting to go to the finals, a team that has an MVP on their roster, a team that they think has the talent to be able to get over the hump. But when their second player, their second star, isn't producing at a consistent level in the playoffs, they're going to come up short.
Since when is a player that's averaged 20 and 10 not capable of being the second best player on a championship team? James Harden has the ability.
Definitely.
He is capable. But he just doesn't show up to the moment. That's what it is. When he was the first option in Houston, you can rattle off those moments against Golden State. Yes, I understand he was going up against a great team, and I give him passes for that. But I look at more specifically in 2017 versus the Spurs, or if it was 2016 to 2017, Game 6. No Kawhi, no Tony Parker, you lose that game. That's what those moments I look at that. Even when Harden is the best player, he still shows up short. And also, Houston, he had Dwight Howard as a teammate. Years into Howard's tenure in Houston, he wasn't the same. But when they lost to the Blazers in the first round, when Dame gamed them in that series, Dwight was the best player in that series. It wasn't James Harden. James Harden was supposed to be great in that series. He wasn't that great. Dwight Howard, he didn't get along with. He wanted the offense to himself. Chris Paul, who went to the finals with Phoenix and was a big reason why they went to the finals, they don't get along. They still don't get along. They're not cool.
That series against you said that's when he got game, excuse me. Which one? I'm thinking about the Clippers series where he was bad in game 6, but then was very good in game 7.
It was 2014.
Yep.
Yeah, 2014 where they lost to the Blazers in the first round.
Yep.
Chris Paul is one of the best leaders and winners this game has ever seen. James Harden does not get along with him. James Harden does not like him. After 2019, when they lost to the Warriors, James Harden openly blamed him for the loss subtly by saying, I know what we need to change. Very next move that happened, Chris Paul got traded. And they brought in Russ, and nothing changed. Nah. He goes to Brooklyn. Kevin Durant's supposed to be one of his best friends. He leaves there too. And now Philadelphia, I'm seeing pictures of Joel Embiid and Harden at parties. They're chilling together. They're supposed to be buddy-buddy. and Harden just because the Sixers are unwilling to max him. I just seen Kyrie take a 3-year team-friendly deal to stay in Dallas. James Harden is not willing to do that. He wants max money. After the performance he just gave out, I feel like if I'm Harden, you should feel some sense of embarrassment for how he went out this past playoffs and feel like he has to prove himself to earn what he's talking about. Because those playoffs did not prove himself. And he openly said he wants freedom in an offense. Well, if he goes to the Clippers, you're not going to have much freedom. You will be the primary facilitator, but you will have to succeed to Paul George and Kawhi.
Yeah.
And that's not freedom.
He had 2 games versus the Celtic that he was the primary reason that his team won. However, you can look at it on the opposite side, and that there were games that he did not play well, and that was the result of them also losing.